But anyway, I think one should always approach this stuff with humility and realize and not make snap interpretations of things, but realize that one's interpretation is probably going to continue to evolve as one self evolves.
It certainly has for me.
Yeah.
There's no question of that. Anything that's wise, wisdom words, if you want to call them that, they will continue to deepen like seeds. They'll continue to grow new plants in oneself. Otherwise, I don't want to be stuck with what I said 20 years ago or 30 years ago about something. Why would you do that? Yeah. I mean, Jesus doesn't actually point people to him. I mean, he says, look through me, go through me is what he's talking about when he talks about, connect your small self to the source of that self, which Jung would call the capital S self, or in Aramaic is really called the ruh, or the soul, the ruha. Make that inner connection, and then you'll know what to do. You don't need me to tell you. You don't need some scripture or some holy person to tell you. You'll know what to do.
Yeah. So your book mostly consists of taking various verses from the Bible and then looking at the original Aramaic and, reinterpreting the verse based upon what it might have meant if you understand the Aramaic. And since you just mentioned this thing of Jesus didn't say to people, look to me, why don't we start with that verse that is so often quoted of, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me, which fundamentalists use as an exclusionary kind of, thing.
Yeah, that one plus John 3:16 are the ones that go on the billboards.
Yeah, so, which one is that? The John 16?
For God so loved the world, etc.
Right. Only begotten Son, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I've got all that stuff in there. But all these sayings from the Gospel of John that are translated I am do not actually say I am. Because, and this, I'll have to take a pause before I say it for all of you listening. The ancient Hebrew languages do not have a verb that is translated as am or are or is, a being verb. They do not have this. Why? Because, as you recall, I said they're nomadic. They come out of a nomadic experience. So you can't say, here I am, and this I'm never going to change. Everything is changing. So what he's saying in the Gospels, in the Gospel of John, is literally in Aramaic, ina, I, ina, ina, ina. Two inas together. That means I and I. It's like the Rastafarians. They talk about the I and I. The connection of the individual I to the source of myself, my I, not my I, but my individuality.
Kind of the small s self to big S self.
Small s self to big S. That's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
So if you connect this way, this is the way, he says. This is really literally the path, is what he is. Then he says, Inanna urha is a path. Shrada is the sense of right direction, which way to go when you come to a roads. He uses this word very often. For instance, you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. He says, if you find the heart's direction of the right direction, then you're free. That is the truth. So he says here in John, Inanna urha shrada, I am the way. The truth is the sense of right direction, or the heart's GPS. And chai, which is universal in the ancient Semitic languages, means life energy. He doesn't mean life somewhere else, or life on a cloud somewhere. This is life energy that is throughout the universes, seen and unseen. So he says, if you make this connection, you'll have your path, you'll know which way to go, and you'll have plenty of energy to travel the path. Now, on the other bit, the exclusive bit, he says, well, this is, as he understands it, and I'll give you a gloss on this, it's more exact in the book. Yeshua says, I understand it. This is the way everyone has gone. This is the way everyone gets to where I've gone, is they follow this inner connection of small self to big self. You could say soul, of self to soul. So, and this, as his experience is, this is the way it goes. You can go directly, or you can have somebody help you. I'm helping you. But You know, you have to start with dealing with your individual self.
Right. So in other words, you have to, if you want to get water, you have to hook the pipe up to the reservoir.
Well, basically,
Yeah.
I mean, and some people go, as they say, you can use other people to help you to go through them. Middle Eastern traditions are strong on this, or you can go direct. You don't have to have, you could say, help. Some people just, and you've had many of the men on your program. They just wake up one morning and boom, life has changed, and that happens too. So,
Yeah. So then to summarize that verse, it basically says, if you want to be free, or, you could even say to reach your full potential, you have to connect Jiva with Atman. You have to connect individual consciousness with universal consciousness, and then you'll be good to go.
then you're good to go. And the rest of it is all him giving you different stories, metaphors, to help, how would we say, corral his students into that experience. If you excuse the sheep metaphor, he does use at some point. So it's, he uses story language, he uses metaphor, parables, things like this.
It's remarkable. I mean, if we believe that Jesus did all the things he was reputed to do, all the miracles, it's remarkable how abundant they were. I mean, he must have been making such a stir, healing all these people and multiplying loaves and fishes and walking on the water. And I mean, if there were anybody like carrying on like that in today's world, they'd be like all over YouTube and on the evening news and stuff like that. It's, it must have been quite a shock to.
Well,
yeah.
Again, remember that we're 2,000 years earlier or so in human consciousness. So the understanding of and I'm going to switch psychology language in here, the understanding of a liminal realm, a realm between the realms, between this everyday and the unseen, is much more people are open to that.
I see.
That's why you have people who are able to see demons or devils or things like this. And these can be shared experiences even. So, one of the things that struck me about his healings is that it says in the usual translation, Jesus shows up in a village, and he preaches and everybody flocks to him. Well, the word for preach in Aramaic just means he announced himself. And so he comes to the village, he says, okay, here I am. Have you heard about me? It's not like he's giving them a Sunday sermon. And because people were living under this traumatic reality and they were living in these dissociated states, all these people pour out to be healed. And some of these dissociated states would lead to, as we would now call it, physical ailments. And so, because he can make this connection, a healthy connection to the unseen, he's able to heal them. It's as simple as that. Because how is it there were all these ailing people running around in Palestine at the time? Was every other person sick? Well, it's because they were all living under a traumatic reality and had been for generations.
Yeah, we see that today
we do.
Afghanistan and places where the people of Somalia, people have been so traumatized by decades of brutality. Well, that's an interesting point you made about how that the consciousness of the people was much less. Well, we were talking earlier about the materialist paradigm that dominates today. It was much more subtle than that in a way, or in tune with the deeper levels at which things like angels or all that were considered normal. Just part of people's understanding.
Sure. It was. I would call it. It was much more embedded, Rick.
Yeah.
Everything was more embedded in each other in nature and all of this. Now that has a downside if you're in a so-called dysfunctional family, as we would use in today's terms, or if you're living in a terrible reality. But this is why people were, having these unhealthy states, if you will.
Yeah, interesting. So let's take some other verses. So you've interpreted the Lord's Prayer, the Beatitudes, and all kinds of verses that I've always, you hit some, a lot of the greatest hits, like if a house divided itself against itself cannot stand, and all that. So we couldn't possibly cover them all, but and when those of you who are listening live, if there are particular verses you'd like Douglas to comment on, Neil to comment on, send them in through a question, and maybe he can comment on that one. But what one would you like to do next?
I think the one I want to do is about the words for good and evil, which are very key in the Gospels, because, for instance, Jesus is quoted as saying, "A good tree bears good fruit, and an evil tree bears evil fruit." So, how does this tree become morally evil?
Was he speaking metaphorically? He's not talking about.
Well, no. This is
trees.
This is the King James Version translation. Good tree bears good fruit, or evil tree bears evil fruit. Well, what he's saying actually is the word for good in Aramaic, the word that's usually translated as good from the Greek, actually means ripe, R-I-P-E. That is at its right time, at its right place. Again, think nomadic reality, think timing, being in the moment, all of this. So a ripe tree bears ripe fruit, and an unripe tree bears unripe fruit. And you might say, well, Jesus, that's a no-brainer. Well, he says, but he's saying to his students, look around you, look at nature, live the way nature is. Live as a ripe tree. Don't live as an unripe tree, not in the moment. Be in the moment, in the right time, at the right place, with the right action. And then this then becomes the word, the form of the word takes the main word for blessing in the New Testament. So, for instance, all of these so-called Beatitudes, blessed are the ... The word for blessed are, really there's no R, because you heard me say that before, but the word for blessing means ripeness. For instance, in the first Beatitude, usually translated, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He says, ripening are those who Lemeskene Ibaruch, find their home in the breath. Poor in spirit is the King James translation, but Lemeskene means that the person is holding on to the breath, to their breathing, as though it were their first and last possession, which actually it is. I mean, it's the first thing that comes into our bodies when we come into life. It's the last thing that leaves. He says, when you hit rock bottom in this way, then things begin to open up for you. Then comes to you Dilhone, is coming to you Dilhone Malkuta, not kingdom, actually queendom in Aramaic because it's feminine gendered. Then comes to you the sense of empowerment, of vision with empowerment that is throughout the whole cosmos. You have a much bigger home then. You have a sense of vision with the energy to accomplish a vision in life. So, but you have to sort of go to the 12 steppers call, rock bottom, and start from there, really.
So do you mean rock bottom the way a 12 stepper would, where you've just, really bottomed out and you're desperate? Or do you mean rock bottom in terms of some, deeper fundamental level of reality that you connect with?
Well, because
that could be thought of as a foundation or a rock bottom too.
Yeah, it can. Either one. I mean, the people to whom Jesus spoke the Beatitudes in Matthew seem to have been really at rock bottom. They were homeless. They had nowhere to go. They had been driven off their land. They, maybe driven out of their family. And so literally they didn't know where to go or what to do. And so he begins to give this you could say.
He's encouraging them.
He's starting a process with them, which
Yeah.
proceeds through the Beatitudes, from starting with finding your home in the breath to acknowledging the places that are mourning or grieving or confused in you, and then it goes on and on through the different Beatitudes, the so-called Beatitudes. Yeah.
Maybe what he's saying there is, yeah, I know things are really rough for you people, but I have something to teach you here, which will actually bring you fulfillment and inner happiness, regardless of your outer circumstances, and might in fact improve your outer circumstances.
Yeah, and it's not just the words. Again, imagine that there is an atmosphere of this person, as one has in authentic spiritual teachers today, where one sort of can feel that.
Yeah.
You can feel their way of being and perceiving and living with that.
What one would you like to do next?
Let's see. Where shall we go?
I can throw a few at you, but I want you to choose if possible.
Well, gosh, I started with the prayer of Jesus, the so-called Lord's Prayer, although I argue that there's no word in Aramaic that is actually well translated as Lord. That's a medieval feudalistic concept that gets layered over onto the Gospels. So I just call it the prayer of Jesus, the one he gives in words. So we can look a little bit at that. I'll dip into a bit of that, but I'd like to remind people that Jesus didn't always pray in words. When it says he went into the hills and stayed overnight praying, it doesn't mean he's mumbling words to himself all night. He's talking about, in another place in the Gospels, pray just with my atmosphere. That means in silence. Pray with my Shem, which is the word for atmosphere or light, or, the light that you feel through my atmosphere. Just pray that way. Pray in the silence. Pray with that feeling.
Well, you mentioned the atmosphere around a spiritual teacher like that.
Yeah.
You've probably experienced it, and I know I have.
Yeah.
You can entrain with the teacher's consciousness.
Exactly.
By sitting in that atmosphere and, shift into something very profound just by mere proximity.
Absolutely. It's a human thing. You don't need any special apparatus. You can, if you feel your breath and feel your heart, you're there.
Yeah.
You don't need anything special, actually. The only reason I'm doing all this with Jesus is because many people have been burdened with Jesus in their childhood, as I was to some degree, although not as bad as some people. And so when they go into other traditions, Vipassana or anything, Advaita, this or that, they may reach a certain point where their childhood comes up to them. And part of that childhood is sort of fear and loathing around Jesus, basically. Jesus phobia, I call it. And that prevents them from actually, going a little further. So for a lot of people that have come to my work, that's how they found their way to it. They went elsewhere, and then they figured, well, I guess I better heal this too. So,
yeah, I was just watching a series on television called Anne with an E, which is based on Anne of Green Gables, and there's a part of the story where the missionaries or these Christian people are taking young Indian kids away from their parents and locking them in these residential schools, which we've heard a lot about recently because the Pope went and apologized for that. But and one of their phrases was "kill the Indian to save the child," and they were literally killing many of them, but they were also just brutalizing their whole traditional understanding in order to supposedly save them. It makes my blood boil sometimes when I think of the number of people who've been the genocides that have been committed in the name of religion. And I'm afraid that Christianity might, if you look at the whole history of all religions, it might be in the lead in that, unfortunate regard.
It is. If we can segue into that briefly. I would agree in that a misinterpretation, not only of the Gospels, but also of the whole Bible, empowers colonialism, racism, and ecocide. And one of the key verses I point to, which when I did my book on Genesis, I retranslated, was one of the most egregious mistranslations, deliberate mistranslations in the history of translation, which is the verse in Genesis that's usually translated, "Be fruitful, multiply, dominate, and subdue the earth, and rule over, and then ... It's all the other ones that were created in Genesis before the human. Well, the Hebrew doesn't say that. The Hebrew says, yes, you will be fruitful, and you will multiply. Learn how to manage, learn how to manage your own earth, your own earthiness, your own material existence. Learn how to manage that. And then it doesn't say rule over, the fish and the animals and the trees. It says rule together with, rule along with, rule from within. This is a total mistranslation of a Hebrew preposition. This preposition is never meant over, as in rule over, in its whole history, either ancient Hebrew or modern history. So this just gets read into it because, well, it has to say that, because we have to dominate, we're now in charge, right, and we're going to go.
We heard there's
whoever.
gold in among the Incas, and we want it. So let's go there.
And you native peoples are not using this land, so you're not there. You don't exist.
Yeah.
It's like that.
Oh boy. We're getting back into rant mode.
I know. Sorry.
It's okay. I do it too.
I tend to get into that quite a bit, but
yeah. I mean, it's just there's so many injustices. It's so ironic, tragically ironic, that so many injustices have been perpetrated in the name of what should be the greatest blessing, that a person could possibly have in life. Yeah. The blessing of knowing God and experiencing God. It's just so twisted.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's as I say, the human consciousness is developed in such a way that now we're stuck with everything that this has resulted in is in front of us. I mean, it's all in front of us now. Yeah. So how are we going to use...
In other words, like the condition of the world, the condition of the environment, all that stuff.
Everything. Yeah. How are we going to use this human self, which is now separated? How can we turn? How can we return, as the Hebrew mystics talk about? And again, this is where Jesus is constantly giving this, you could say, his mode, his map, although the map is not the traveling, to turn from your small self to the big self, yourself to your soul, from the breath, which is only living in this body, this material form for X number of years, and the breath which is everywhere and all the time, and before my birth and after my death, before my original face and after my last face, if I can paraphrase the Buddhists on that one. So, we're either going to make the shift or we're not.
Right. Okay, well, that reminds me of a verse, because I think of, deep spirituality as being the ultimate solution to the world's problems. So, the verse, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all else should be added unto thee.
Yeah.
Let's work on that one.
Well, my translation, although it's not in this new book, it says, if you're going to aggravate yourself and run around and pursue anything, do that first, about finding, and again, these words, kingdom, again, it's malkuta in Aramaic. It's actually queendom, feminine gendered, and it means this combination of a vision with an empowerment. And, a lot of your interviewees have had this in these awakening moments. They've had sort of it's not just that they had a vision of something somewhere else, but this was downloaded into them in the sense that was empowering to them, whether they're a psychic or, an online mystic or whoever they are. So they have this sense of the Malkuta. And this Malkuta is throughout Shemaiah, he says, the kingdom of heaven. Heaven not up there, but heaven being the realm of light and vibration that is everywhere around us, underneath us, above us, and within us. It's as I called it in another book, sort of the wave reality that the new physics people talk about, rather than the particle reality. So he says, don't fuss yourself too much about all the particle reality. Find first this connection to that which is always on, and which you can always rely upon. And then you will have a real, if I can make the point of this, then you'll have a real non-duality, because everything will be included. You'll have the individual self included, but it will be included in that which is empowering it every breath.
Yeah, empowering is a good word, and I mean I see that inner world as being the potentiality from which the whole universe arises. And if a person is cut off from it, and I bet you there's some Bible verse about this, then they are like a plant that is cut off from, contact with the ground or the nourishment from the earth. Whereas if they're deeply connected to it, then it just pours into their individual life and through their individual life to all whom they contact.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Rick. The verse I think you're alluding to is the one where he says, this is another one of the ones that people make a lot out of in Christian fundamentalism, the so-called sin against the Holy Ghost. Well, Jesus talks about, sin in Aramaic means to cut yourself off from something.
Does it also mean to miss the mark? I've heard it translated.
It can mean that. It depends on which word for sin.
Okay.
The Greek is actually the same, but the Aramaic is more sort of like cutting yourself off. I know I've heard this thing about missing the mark with the
like
arrow.
I said with the plant, cutting yourself off from the source of your nourishment.
You're cutting yourself off from what's called rucha de kudsha, he calls it. That is the breath. Rucha is breath. De kudsha, that breath which is throughout everything, that breath which empowers our breathing every moment. It's the atmosphere of the earth, it's the climate, it's the atmosphere of the universe, non-physical, physical, it's all of that. So it says, don't cut yourself off from that. This separation, this cannot be healed, this sin, so to speak, cannot be healed because you're no longer breathing in a unified way with cosmos, with everything that empowers the cosmos.
Yeah.